I've just noticed a problem. Just fixing it. Okay. Hi, Srikanth. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, my pleasure, John. Anytime.
So it's funny how our worlds collided. I'm in the large-scale Scrum community amongst other communities, and I've been an admirer of your commentary and your insights. And I discovered only recently that you're also involved in the Kinevin world, and I hadn't appreciated that actually. We spoke recently, and of course you've been very active on previous live stream interviews that we've had. So I thought, well, let's see what Srikanth has to say.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I love being here, and hopefully I'll serve some value to being here, and that's what it's about.
Thank you so much, Srikanth. So I believe you have a presentation for us.
Yeah, I do. I just have a few slides to just get the conversation started, and as we go through the conversation and questions come by, we can adapt to it as we progress.
Thank you. I'll hand it over to you, Srikanth. I'll come off camera for now. Talk soon.
Sure. Thanks, John. So, yeah, for sure. So you can see the topic here is how to thrive in the age of complexity.
Indeed, yeah. So you can start presenting.
And so I think I have a challenge here. I was getting a loop back. Now it's
okay. Srikanth, you're having some audio issues, are you?
So the topic I have today is yeah, that's right. It seems to be fine now. It looks like, John, then when you go away, I start getting a loop back of my own voice a second time.
Okay, I'll stay here. No problem.
Okay, thank you. So let me do a start again. The wonders of complexity from technology today. So okay, I think I figured it out. I was also connected to YouTube Live, so I was getting the audio back from it. So that's solved now. So the topic I have today is potentially looking at how do we thrive in the age of complexity. And one of the things that I do all along every day is how do we realize the best utility from knowledge work? That's really what organizations are today, and that's been the area or topic of focus for me. And how can we help organizations and human systems do their best work? So that's the question that I grapple with. So I'll move on to my next slide. Just a few lines about myself. Again, I'm not looking at kind of a profile here, more around, I was talking about the questions that come by me. And just leave you with some questions like, my focus area today is on how humans think in large groups, and to what end. How do we think and put that thinking to use in terms of work that we do? How do we stimulate human curiosity and thinking and learning? And how to apply manifestos, frameworks, and tools and techniques when each one brings its own bias to the table, and within the constraints of these biases, how do we do the best work? So those are some of the questions. And what I talked about earlier is that what is utility, and how can we actually be cheaper and faster than our competition so that we can have better survival and resilience. So some questions that keep muddling. And I have some answers, though I open to critically update my answers every day from the learning. And many of you today on this show and the questions that you ask will drive revisiting and looking at potentially getting better answers. So I'm not really wedded to any methods, tools, or techniques or ideas, and you're constantly evolving in order to find what a better answer could be.
So, Srikanth, just curious, does this kind of mean that you're agnostic about agility?
Yeah, that's one of the questions that I ask myself. What does agnostic mean? And part of the conversation today is trying to muddle through that question as well and see what does agnostic mean. Can we be truly agnostic? Because agnostic means eliminating all biases, and we know as humans we can't eliminate our biases. We can only work with them. We can have tools and techniques that kind of either try to minimize the impact of the biases or work with them. Work with them and make the best of it, including the fact that we are biased. So one of these two techniques or application of various tools and techniques to do one of these two things. So my goal is to be agnostic, though I still don't know what that means yet.
Yeah, I can kind of go along with that, because on the one hand, as change agents, maybe we don't mind which approach people use, and maybe we want to find what's right for the context. On the other side, on the other hand, if you kind of flip that coin, if you kind of take it to the extent where we don't care what people do as long as they deliver, that can be a slippery slope sometimes.
Yeah, it just goes down to what you value, right? Are you valuing a one-time answer to get something done today? Or are you valuing the learning that you get from these answers and the resilience that you can build from that learning for future work? So depending on the context, the answers are quite different, for sure.
Thank you.
So just a couple of starter slides, which exemplifies my thinking is that, well, I come across a journey too. I was enamored by Scrum in 2005. It was completely different from the waterfall type of techniques that I was practicing earlier to that. But again, along the way, I've been asking the question, even if Scrum is made up, is it value? Or is it the only value? And what is the basis of it? And so eventually I evolved to a point that many of these thinking techniques are context dependent, and you use them in concert. Depending on the situation, you're going to apply the best thinking that will be valuable for at that point in time. So this slide again exemplifies that. If people are just focused on one type of thinking, they are too much wedded to their perspectives. They think that that is an answer to all the world's problems, and you want to step away from that kind of being wedded to perspectives. So I think that each one has its own value in a given context, and you want to apply these thinking tools in concert. So that's my current viewpoint on how to apply thinking tools.
And just on that, it kind of presents a new problem, doesn't it? Because, okay, each of these schools of thought contribute their own value, but in some places they conflict against each other, aren't they? And how do you deal with that?
Indeed, which means that you have to take these thinking tools and you have to derive what are the values and principles behind the tools, what are they trying to achieve, and how is it of utility to me in the way that I'm solving a problem. So you have to look at it from that context. I've tried to have some answers in future slides to that question that you raised, John. And we will broach the subject in a couple of slides from here. So extending this concept of problem with thinking, where we have added to our perspectives, we also have, especially in the agile space, there is a lot of frameworks, and I consider frameworks as selling answers before you have formalized what the problem could be. So there are lots of them. I've highlighted a few here. Less, safe, Kanban, DevOps, design thinking, that's the fad of the season. It's also called hype cycles. A lot of these things are being done, but unless you integrate all of them together into a cohesive thinking pattern of what we can do with them, because uh, my strong opinion is that they are not individually valuable. But if you look at it as an overarching system of approaches, and if you figure out a way to make the system work in concert, then there is potentially better value to it. If you don't look at problem solving that way, then you are probably getting very little from it. The frameworks themselves are not the goal, right? No, an organization is not going to go out there and say, I want to be like Scrum, or I want to have Scrum. To what end? Or I want to have Kanban. To what end? So by themselves, they are very limited value. So earlier you asked a question, John, about agnostic. So I have the questions myself. These are the questions that I wrangle with every day. Is how can you be agnostic until you know all the answers and can help the customer pick the right answer in the right context? If you don't have a breadth of knowledge, including multitude of perspectives, you can't be agnostic to the tools and techniques. Then you have to do away with all the tools and techniques. But then there is the agnostic movement where people say, I want to sign up to be agnostic. What does it mean? I go in and help some teams solve their problems. But is it enough? What if the problem is systemic? What if the team is disbanded at the end of the work and the collective knowledge built in the team goes away? So what are we agnostic to? And that's the big question. The second question that I have is, will you problem solve within the context of your knowledge or skills, or would you look at it systemically? So my learnings over the last 10, 15 years in systems thinking has taught me that if you are optimizing locally at a small team level, you are globally, in most cases, you're sub-optimizing the system. By making your teams better, you're making the overall results worse. Unless the whole work that is done end to end is done by that one team. So that introduces some interesting dilemmas. So you might be agnostic to making a team extremely high performance, but it might be at the detrimental of the organization needs. And the third question, which I keep asking myself, is, will I walk away if I'm not capable of helping solve the customer problems? If I have a lack of knowledge, or I'm not truly have the contextual answers to the situation at hand where I cannot coach them or help them with it, would I walk away? And these are the questions. Well, I didn't call it agnostic agility, but just agnostic by itself. Are we truly agnostic as human beings? I don't think it's possible, because if we are limited by our knowledge and beliefs, I might claim to be agnostic, but I'm still going to practice my knowledge and what I've learned, because I'm limited by it. And that is a big problem in being truly agnostic. And I don't have the answer for that, but I continue to acquire a breadth of knowledge every day and continue to inspect myself at a third party and ask myself, what if I am wrong? And what is right in this context? And do I know all these answers? And if I do not know all the answers, how do I work in the situation to find out how the right thing can be achieved? Those are some of the questions. So some context to the elements in complexity space. Again, from an organization perspective, I just split it into three parts. There are the people, they are the customers and the market, the ones who are consuming the services or the experiences in the market from what organizations produce. Then there are people who are producing it, the actual doers, the employees, and the partners. In many organizations, there are lots of partners. Either there's a supply chain or associated people outside the organizations helping in completing the works, or even sometimes partnership in tools and techniques which are borrowed from others. In order to meet certain goals, this is what we're trying to achieve. Again, the goals is a balance of several things. It's not just one thing. It's not just you go and look at the market, and there sometimes is extremely high focus on flow of value delivery and less focus on innovation or safety or quality. But these are an integral, interrelated answer, because if you are not balancing all these needs all at the same time, then it's detrimental to flow. So if, for example, if you're not focusing on quality and your quality is bad, and you continue putting out very poor quality product in the market, then you are going to either lose business because of that, or at some point in time you're going to react a lot, and therefore you're going to put in a lot of patches, and it's going to impact your customer experience. So these are interrelated. You can't do one at the cost of other, though you could at some point in time focus on one aspect of them because of the importance, but then if you're not balancing and catching up on the other aspects, that there will be a detrimental cost at a later time. And then the third part is the actual products and the set of practices in the organization that introduce change in the product or service, right? How do we actually deliver our services? How do we add fixes to our services? How do we add new ideas to our services? How do we even innovate new services and products? And the question around organizing teams, supporting the teams in terms of hiring practices and funding and budgeting and so forth. And what does continuous innovation or continuous improvement mean? These are some of the other parameters that. Now, essentially, all I'm hypothesizing is that an organization that is top of the line today does all of it all at the same time. And so if you're looking at a Google or a Facebook or any of the modern organizations today, like the market outliers, it doesn't need to be a technology company. You could still talk about maybe SpaceX or Tesla, if it is a non-IT company, or you even look at organizations like Southwest Airlines. Now, if you do that, then they are in some way doing all of this extremely well, all at the same time. So that's really the answer in complexity, is that finding answers to, if you look at my next slide, is application of transdisciplinary thinking, connecting, and executing. So that's really the key to building organizations that can truly thrive in the age of complexity. So that's my hypothesis. And are organizations ready to do that, or how do you get there with the least possible pain and in a sustainable and reliable way that allows the organizations to focus on the real complexity, the market complexity, the technology change complexity, rather than the self-created complexity like hierarchy and organization structures which limit flow. So the two types of complexity, internal and the one that's eliminatable, and one that you have to accept and work with. Like, for example, if I do not know, I may never know what my customer complexity is, right? Today, the customer might be extremely happy with my product and service, but tomorrow, as the market changes, their needs change, and their needs might be quite fulfilled by somebody else with a better product or service. So how do I handle that customer complexity? Vis-a-vis, there's complexity of our own making. We have made our organization so complex, and that to the extent that it slows us down in terms of spending a lot of time and energy and money just to navigate that organization the way it is. And you want to distinguish between these two. So essentially, this is my high-level answer. So you look at each one of the parameters that drive these organizations that we talked about before, and if you can figure out how each one of these interacting elements can interact with each other and work as a cohesive single system, then you are in the best place. You are in the best place where you can focus on the market needs. You are in a situation where potentially you could release products and services to market fairly quickly. So if you have an idea on Monday morning, you can launch and test an MVP or a feature by Wednesday afternoon. Now the question is, can you do that? And what are the underlying things that need to change in order to be able to do that? That's really the question that we're trying to help organizations with in any context.
A quick question there for you, Srikanth, if that's okay.
Sure, John.
There's a comment, there's a piece of text on the slide that I don't fully understand.
Mm-hmm.
It says outsized balance of goals and purpose. What do you mean by that?
That might have been a typo, or I'm still thinking through why I put the word outsized there. Outsized focus, perhaps, of balance. So what I go back to my previous slide. So what I'm trying to articulate is there's a variety of goals. You're trying to meet flow of delivery. At the same time, you're trying to meet safety and environmental goals. And you also want to make it cost competitive. You want it to be innovative, so you're not constantly spending on money on it at time. And you want it to be at a high level of quality. So what I'm trying to say is that you need an outsized balance of goals and purpose. Like, you take these goals and you're trying to have some kind of a method to keep all these in balance at the same time. Maybe outsized may not be the right word. It's an outsized approach to balancing the goals and purpose, I would say. Maybe it's missing the word approach. So it is a systemic and it's a focused approach on how you can balance these various things all at the same time. That's what I'm trying to say there.
Okay, really curious how you do this, because if I was an executive, I'd buy this, and can I have it? So how do I do it, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it looks good.
For sure. Yeah. Yes.
Good. Thank you.
No problem. Great question, John. So that kind of keeps my noodles asking, how do we simplify, right? So again, if you take this previous slide and simplify it into three things, it's all about humans. So all the other things are done by the people in these organizations. So either it is about humans in the market, the customers and the market needs in the market, the wants and needs which are there that we are trying to satisfy with the products and services that we have. It is the employees and partners and the way we structure them in teams and the practices around that in how they meet these customer wants and needs in the market with the products and services. And I call management as backstage leadership team. So two key changes to executive and senior management is that how you look at them is that you want them to be leaders in a leader-leader environment, which means the employers and partners are leaders too. It's an environment of parity, but again, I don't believe in this approach of throw people together in a room, they'll collaborate and figure it out. You want channeled delivery. You need to channel human potential to create outcomes. You can't just throw people and have multitude of voices and opinions and channel outcomes out of it fairly easily. So backstage leadership is leaders who are able to channel the potential of employees to certain customer and market needs. And such leadership also needs to be a team in their own right, not individual silos who are solving the problem from their perspective, but together as a cohesive team, a cross-functional, limited silo team in order to achieve that result. So it comes down to what I call as humanistic practices. How do we enable humans? So if you look at many of the thinking tools that we use, whether it be lean thinking or which derived from both the TPS and the Toyota Way 2001, or if you apply things like systems thinking, which has evolved over the last 100 or so years into which it's more of an idea, which is a collection of tools and techniques which you need to practice, quite a lot of tools and techniques there. And even complexity thinking. So with lenses like the tool that I use, Cunavin, which comes from the practice of naturalized sense making, which is really anthropocomplexity is the practice of how do humans behave anthropologically in a complex way and how to deal with that. So it comes down to practices we derive from that, and to these we add other constructs like how do we humans work in social networks, right? To know what is there from network theory, what does sociology tell about human behavior, and add these practices like to the other practices that are required, and then have a cohesive answer to how do we make the best of humanistic practices so that we can meet customer and market wants and needs in the best possible way.
Just a quick question there again, Srikanth. So backstage leadership, I think I recognize that from Viral Change from Leandro Herrero. Is that where you pulled that from, or was it from other sources?
That is a term that I actually borrow from Leandro. In fact, borrow is the right term. I borrow thousands of things from hundreds of sources to put these together. So there's no when you go to organizations, you're not teaching them. All you're doing them is you're teaching them to think, you're teaching them to learn, you're teaching them to cross connect, and you're teaching them to start a journey of 1,000 things. But as a system, and that's the hard part. If we don't do that, then change is long drawn. Like I kind of see coaches going to organizations say, let me fix what the current problem is. But then after 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, they are still helping them fix problems and they're still there. And they charge big bucks for it. Like I charge, like you charge $500,000 a year and you're still there. And sometimes I feel the value has not been passed on. If the system does not learn to do it on their own by themselves, then it's not a humanistic practice. We are not really passing on the thinking tools, the learning tools. So essentially, in most of these practices, all we are trying to teach them is learning to think, learning to learn, and learning to practice what they think and learn. That's pretty much it. And at some point in time, they will be able to start finding their own answers beyond what we get them started with.
Thank you, Srikanth.
So I pull this from the World Economic Forum report. If you really look at humanistic practices, how do we apply the people to, in the best possible way, to solve market and customer wants and needs? That's the question that we are grappling with. In the best possible way, it should be sustainable. The learning should be retained in the organization. The learning should be valuable in the future, not just in the current situation. So if you ask some of these questions, then it really points down to the work that I'm doing, which is transdisciplinary connecting is what I do. You want to learn and connect things, connect a multitude of things, hundreds and thousands of things at scale across thousands of people. And if you can do that, the better you do that, the better your organization is going to be. And that's what I distill most of the top organizations to be. If you look at much of the top organizations which do really well in the market, they have the ability to do that. They have an ability to allow the people to learn a multitude of things and apply things in the context of the work in different ways in order to deliver that customer want and need. So that's the answer. Transdisciplinary people in your organization for knowledge work. So move away from treating people as cogs and try to enable the cognition, which is so we do treat people as minions. You tell them what to do. You say you are XYZ developer, you are a Java developer, you are a tester, or you are a business analyst. We put them in that role. But that's not what we want. We want them to be what is called as the M-shape or comb-shape people. In fact, lots of combs, not just one or two or three or four, but a broad breadth of knowledge. The more teeth you have in your comb, the better it is, and the comb works better. So and you can see the direction going there. The current COVID-19 situation has shown that the plans that we have are pretty much quite useless in the face of complexity. And so if that is true today, actually it has always been true before, just that we didn't realize it so far. So in the modern era, in the age of 2020 and later, these are the skills, complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity and innovation, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, and cognitive flexibility. So if you really look at these skills, that's what we want our people to have. And if we are able to have an environment to work on it, yes, it does require a lot of hard practice of methods, and practice many methods in concert together all at the same time. So it's a learning journey where you learn by practice, no doubt about it. But at the same time, it's all about cognition and thinking. How far can you widen the thinking? What can that breadth be? And the wider the breadth of your people in knowledge work, the better your organization is going to be. So all I'm saying is do not put them in boxes. Break the box, and then you can build a better organization.
Just notice as well, Srikanth, that emotional intelligence is in there as well. I don't see that on the 2015 list. It's interesting, huh?
Yes, again, I just use these lists to make a point. They might or might not be accurate. Sometimes what is required might be number 100th on the list, and in retrospect, in perhaps 50 years, we'll know them, right? If you look at the science of change, much of the change is not accepted, so it's not the norm. And if you go back to things like even Galileo And before that, if you look at, there was the concept that the world was flat, and when we I missed the name of the person who said the sun is at the center of the earth, and that change was not accepted for 200, 300 years, even though it was scientifically proven. Galileo actually was jailed by the Pope, and died in jail because he was a hard proponent of that. So those are some of the things. So these lists are not meant to be ubiquitous, just as a trend of the direction towards what it's going. So if you want to be ahead of this curve, you want to come up with your own list on what really this means today, than before others do. Because if the secret sauce is out for everybody to follow, and then the McKinseys and the Gartners and the Deloittes come up with the Kool-Aid for the organizations which feed the same answers to everybody, then you're already 10 years behind the curve. So you want to make your own list before they come up with a McKinsey list for what is the top 10 skill for next year.
Thank you, Srikanth.
You're welcome. So this is the question that, this is the theme really of this presentation today, is that what is utility? So utility, value is a overused word, so I'm trying to stay away from it. Everybody talks value, business value, value of a story, value of a feature, value of a release. Often, in fact, if you look at the stories, I'm a big fan of Toyota and the work they do. Toyota believes that today, after nearly 70 years of change or 80 years of change and continuous improvement that they have done, they still have 70% waste in their system. And this is in the manufacturing system. So, and they're humble enough to talk about it. They say we are not the best yet, and there's so much opportunity to make it even more better than where we are. If that is so, my hypothesis is even more different, that most organizations, 90% or more of the work is being done today is absolutely waste. They have no utility to doing it. In fact, I would even challenge that. The COVID situation itself is an example. They do cut, many of the organizations have cut a lot of work from their portfolio and doing much less this year. But guess what? Last year, all these were considered priority. And if you're cutting half the work now, and you can still get away with it, perhaps you can still cut another 40% of the leftover work, just 10% slice, you leave them back, and you might be still fine with it. So it's, the systems are fraught with waste. The Pareto principle rules. In fact, value is a very poorly understood word in old school organizations that I work with, where you want to justify everything through business cases. I see the concept of business cases, which is an illusionary story, which people believe that is true until it gets done. And after it gets done, multitude of projects get released together, so nobody really knows what caused the actual performance that came out of the system. There is no direct cause-effect traceability in a complex environment. So you get away with it. You're not really tracking the value. It's perceived value. You throw some money at it, and you build something new for the sake of building it. And then life goes on, and next year you rinse and repeat. So lots of studies around this. Russell Lakoff talks about it. John Hagel talks about it. Lots of others who talk about it. The concept of management is supposed to cost more than $3 trillion just in the US alone, with adding very limited value. But we continue to do the same thing, do very limited utility work. And how can you change that? It doesn't take a lot to change that. We want to start leading with questions rather than answers. You want to be like Jeff Bezos, anally customer centric. Not just talk about it, but put where your money or your mouth is. There were times over the last 10, 15 years, Amazon has reinvested all their money into future technologies and products and services without giving anything back to the shareholders. But look at their stock today. They still have grown more than 1,000% from 10, 15 years ago. Though they don't pay back to the stockholder, they have built a magnitude of wealth in their system because they are a leading player in the market from the competitive advantage that they have built. So you can't build it overnight, but this is by being customer centric. But mostly, if you look at, I see banking or insurance and the other financial industry that I've done most of my work in, all that is lip service. It's essentially your belief that you are solving customer problems with very limited exposure to actual client or talking to them. Again, there's a lot of use of terminology like we do design thinking and we have a huge design thinking team and things like that. But design to what end? What are we designing out of the system? Are we designing complexity out of the system? Are we designing, can we do everything that can be done by a 10-member team that is now being done by a 500-member team? Like if you look at stories like Instagram, they were supporting 300 million customers with a team of 15, whereas we have large organizations which have often mobile teams which exceed in the hundreds, and still they struggle to put out an app release every week or every 2 weeks on the App Store or the Play Store because of the way they are built. So it comes down to really utility. So utility means that you want to think values and principles first, not framework, methods, practices. We have been talking about that since the first set of slides. And then these values and principles drive what tools and techniques and methods and practices we need in concert, and then out of which a framework evolves, which is our own framework. It is the framework of who you are and what you work on, how you work in your organizational context. And that means you have to think in systems, you have to understand people, you have to always solve for the whole. So always think system, but solve the small problem. Every single problem that is solved needs to solve in the context of the big system, not in the context of the small team or that particular situation. So if you could do that, then you're always optimizing the organization. You're not optimizing at a local optimization level. And if you see agility and agile coaching, most of this coaching goes to the teams, the 5% of the work. And 95% of the problem is systemic. If you read Deming and his work and the work that he has done with the Japanese and the lean movement, I'm not saying that lean originated with Deming. Toyota and its practices far exceeded before both their just-in-time practices and their automation started much before Deming, but Deming was instrumental in teaching them to think, and we're still struggling with that after 70 years here in North America. We're still trying to think or learn to think, or still thinking small and solving small, not solving the big problem. And then the application of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, or sometimes it's 90-10, sometimes the value is only 1% of the work and 99% of the waste. So if you look at it through that lens, then you have to really put everything through such scrutiny for value before you do the work, because most of the work doesn't actually have much value. So we are just doing it because we are able to do it. and we have built a narrative that is required for survival. So we continue to do that. But if you really you squeeze the value out of it before you start the work, then the answers might be elsewhere. You may not be doing much of the work that we do today. And continuous improvement is also today a highly misused term. So any continuous improvement has to be continuous innovation, right? It's not just product which is continuously improving, but if I go back to some of my slides before, you are actually continuously improving quality, reducing cost. You're continuously improving your environment you're working, both the local environment of the organization and the external environment. You're continuously improving the safety of the work. You're continuously improving the flow of delivery, and then you're continuously innovation. And so innovation often is thought as a bad word, right? So here we think innovation, no, I need an innovation team to do that. No, you don't need an innovation team to do that. Maybe maybe you have a new product that you're developing, and then the product idea might need new product techniques to build something new. But you have to integrate the innovation into everything that you do, not just products, but your overall meta process of how you produce the product needs to be put through a microscope. So that's really utility. The crux of transdisciplinary learning is to apply that learning at scale to utility. Can we create utility, and can we create turning on a dime, a borrowed term from Craig Larman, and can you really turn on a dime in everything that you do, is the question. And how do you do that? And if you can find the answers, that's going to set your organization apart from the other ones, rather than me too and copied practices that is just trying to catch up the minimum that you can with the others for the same amount of money and time, or even lesser amount of money and time. You can start with first principles every year. You can start with first principles any day. When you solve the previous problem, you can go back to first principles for the next set of problems. What is the next biggest customer problem, and how would I start it or solve it if I'm starting with a clean slate? So that's really the question that would answer what utility could be. Your utility could be 1,000 times, or it could be 10,000 times the value that you're used to, and it's quite possible. So I'm going to skip this slide. This is more to articulate my approach to coaching and how I help organizations, which is less of a problem. Today is not about me, and this is not about me at all. All I'm saying is that if you want the answers, you can go find these answers and cross-connect them. And I help doing that. I just help learning to learn, learning to think, and learning to continuously innovate by yourself, to the point that you can create your best utility by yourself. That's my approach. So really, John, that's I'd like to stop here and see if there are questions that you have, John, or any others of questions, and then we can elaborate further from here. John, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I just realized.
Yes.
So if anybody wants to ask any questions, please put comments on whichever stream you're on, YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. And if you want to come on camera as well, that's also possible. Meanwhile, I've got a few questions for you, Srikanth, if that's okay. So
Sure.
One of the things that caught my attention a while back was you mentioned reducing cost. So one of the things that John Seddon talks about a lot is, you reduce costs go up. And so really cost reduction tends to be a side effect of improving effectiveness, and I guess improving efficiency as well. What's your view on all of that?
Yeah, you're right. Many of these goals are actually byproducts of just one thing, actually turning on the humans. So turning on the humans, and also if you look at the answer is quite easily there. If you look at the house of TPS, or the typical house of lean picture that we used to see,
Yeah.
house of TPS has two pillars primarily. They have Jidoka and just in time, right?
Yeah.
So if you translate those two into knowledge work, let's say that's in a manufacturing context. So let's translate these two into knowledge work. So Jidoka's automation, right? It's automation with the human element. So if you take your humans and in their way of knowledge work, again, a lot of knowledge work is software work, you automate what is automatable to help them focus more on the design and thinking. So you're trying to help humans spend most of the time in solving problems, doing their work, writing code, designing, and thinking, and automating anything that can be automated. Therefore, they can spend more of their time in thinking. And the second part, which is just in time, is really what John said and says failure demand, right? You Let's say we stop. Hypothetically, we stop all the work in an organization, all the work, all the projects. I have 10,000 people in my IT, and I stop doing all the work, maybe except keep the lights burning kind of work, right? Installing upgrades, keeping
Yeah.
equipment running so existing customers can use it. Then it's fairly easy from that point on, right? You need to find customer demand or failure demand. What is causing the most customer pain, and what can I build to alleviate that pain, using my people to solve that problem in a way that they spend most of the time on thinking and doing, rather than repetitive mundane work like testing and anything that can be automated, right? Your software development stack can be highly automated. Your TDD, ATDD, or your automated scripting for your build processes can take away the repetitive work so the humans can focus their brains on collective problem solving. If you could do that, then that will be the truest value. Of course, you might ask, how do we develop new products? How do we create new innovation? Yes, there are sometimes you need to build things when customers don't have a need for it. I'm not denying that. But for existing products and services, that could be a way of doing it. So that really is kind of the approach that I'm looking at it from a utility perspective.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned Toyota more than once. So I just wanted to ask you about you probably heard of the flow framework, the based on Toyota, right?
Yes.
Um,
Uh,
what are your thoughts on that?
I have strong thoughts on it. Nigel would laugh at this if he looks at
Yeah,
me. In fact, we hosted Nigel Thurlow in our Systems Thinking Toronto meetup just a few weeks back to talk about his experiences.
yeah,
And he's a good guy, and he's too biased by his years in Toyota. That's part of the problem. So other than that, Nigel and I were talking about the flow system, and I said I had challenges reading and writing, so I was asking Nigel, would you do an audiobook for me to read it? And he was saying his book is going to be soon on Kindle. And I said, oh, I'm not going to buy your first version, because I'll wait for your 10th anniversary version for you to work through all the bugs in your process so that you can fix them. And so that's what I'm doing, right? I'm my own 10th anniversary version of various tools and techniques. So that's what Nigel is doing too. He has taken the best of complexity, teaming, and this work at Toyota to come up with some kind of ideology. It's not a framework. He's saying the same things that I'm saying. Do transdisciplinary learning, fend for yourself, realize these elements of the system, and work with it. So, from a conceptual perspective, I'm highly aligned with Nigel, but I don't need
yeah,
Nigel because I've done my own journey over the last 10, 15 years to realize it on my own. So, so there it is. It's one perspective that I could borrow from. There's a lot of valuable work there, and there's a lot of what would I say, blindness there too, because of being close to certain things there. So it's a combination of both.
Okay, and then that leads us on naturally to lean then, right? So
Yes,
I'm talking about 20th century lean here now, like, value stream mapping, Kaizen events, all that type of stuff.
yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
So uh, I had some slides, so maybe I should go back to my
Okay,
slides and pick
thank
up
you.
some of the answers on that. So
Thank you. Okay.
thanks, John. So I'm going to jump. Some of these questions I preempted that, right? So I said I am biased towards the philosophy of TPS and the Toyota way. So I'm deliberately now trying to call it lean. And there's a reason for that, right? So there's a lot of people in the market, they talk about the Spotify model, right? There's a pro and con. The big five take the Spotify model and they sell it as an answer to many of the large corporations, and they say, oh, we got tribes and we got squads and we got all sorts of fancy structures. And if you really peel away the layer, they're doing the same thing as before with these new labels and new way of work with limited change to it. So I hate to use the word lean because of the fact that lean was a codification like Spotify of a point in time of what Toyota was into some kind of an idea, thinking tool, and methods and practices. So that's why it doesn't work. I will argue that there are no other lean organizations other than Toyota in the market, just like there is one Spotify, which is the best practitioner of their own method, and we take a method, a photograph of a point in time in Spotify in 2012 and say, hey, this is a framework. And that's an interesting way of looking at a framework. And so is lean. Like if you take Toyota and lean, lean is a codification of a point in time, or of maybe 5 years, 10 years of study of what somebody understood what Toyota was. And then we try to take it to all other organizations as a philosophy. So the value is not in actually doing lean. The value is in decomposing TPS and Toyota way into asking how did the Toyotas work? The two Toyotas who put it together, and people like Tachio Ono, how did they actually do it? What can we learn from it? And that's the value in TPS and Toyota way, not the codification itself. So especially if we extrapolate this to knowledge work, a lot of lean has to change. A lean or TPS, if you really look at it, is hugely manufacturing centric. In manufacturing, we manufacture or we try to manufacture a similar widget for a long time. So I use the word similar because the car is also evolving. So if I'm making a Toyota Corolla, the first car is not the same as the second car, as not the same as the third car, because over a period of time there's continuous improvement, and the parts are changing, the process is changing, the quality is changing. Generally, my theory is that the best Toyota car to buy is the last car of the last model year. So if there's a Corolla and they started making it 2015 and that production run ends in 2020, buy the last car from 2020 because that's the best made car with all the learnings across those 5 years, with all the parts improved and the process improved. And then they introduce Toyota Corolla 2021. It's probably not the best car to buy. Technically, it's improved, but quality-wise, it's back to the drawing board for the next 5 years to improve it. So if that's the learning that you take from it, in knowledge work, the difference is every widget is different. We don't make two widgets of the same. Why would I produce the same two feature? Even if I produce the same feature on two different platforms, they're different widgets. So if I'm producing an app for Android, an app for iPhone, they are different widgets. Android has certain features, and iPhone has different features. We are adapting the widgets to that particular environment. So they're all unique and non-repeatable. So kind of the Toyota focus in lean is mass scale ethnography. They have turned on their people in their factories to observe very closely the way of work that they do in a complex system. And in their step, they are the closest to their work. They are constantly improving their work. But in knowledge work, it's not about improving the process. So let's say I do continuous improvement in my team to improve the way of work. I'm learning TDD, or I'm using Jenkins now to have continuous integration and so forth. But that's only one part of the story. The biggest part of the story is the widget itself. You create a design or an answer to a problem in the customer space. You are limited by what you do. For example, let me say I have 50 people with .NET skills, and all they have is Microsoft .NET skills. They've been working for the last 10 years. Now I take a problem to them. They are only going to problem solve with their knowledge and experience. They're only going to solve it with .NET. Whereas might as well the same problem could be if you are exposed to Rust. Now you could say you could write 1/10 a line of code in Rust to solve the same problem, but no, because there's bias. You are using the tools and techniques that you know to solve the problem, which is not utility. And that's not the utility that we are looking for, because we're trying to have innovation and jump the competition in a way that our work has more resilience. And so we have to look at lean from that perspective. If lean is to develop individual widgets which are completely different, every widget, and each widget could use completely different technology, limited by their people, their skills, their competencies, and their knowledge. How would we do it in a way for it to produce something of utility that is the best available in the market at that point in time, so we can realize the maximum value from it? So that is the lean question to me, John. May not be a short answer, but probably the shortest I could come up with.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I'm curious as well about Cynefin. So, because I mentioned at the very, very start that you're on a journey yourself with Cynefin, and I'm just curious how you're handling that. You know, how do you, because complexity is like the center of what we're doing. That's why agility is needed, right? So
Yes.
I'm curious.
So part of what I explained itself is the answer. So if you look at lean reduces process complexity. So if you have the eyes on the ball, you can improve process complexity. Lean does not reduce market complexity. So anything that is left over, so most of the process complexity comes from the complicated domain. They are practices of methods, and methods, the answers have been there, like TDD or continuous integration. They are not new things in software. They've been there 20 years, 30 years now. After 30 years, we're still trying to get there to practice them. So my thought on that would be to actually, we'll come back to John said and later, is to use Cynefin for wherever there is market complexity. Then you use Cynefin or complexity tools and techniques for that. And wherever there's process complexity, you could use a combination of Cynefin. And if it is in the complicated domain, you can use lean. That's the big idea here, is that you want to use the best of what you learn from both these constructs, or in fact several constructs, two of them. So if you look at the title on top, I clearly say that I'm biased towards those. I'm biased, but I do not totally believe in them, because I keep asking myself the question in each one of them: what if lean was wrong? What if Toyota was wrong? In the current context, if the utility is not there, is my bias going to hurt my usage of it? And similarly, what if John said it is wrong? He's saying some Kool-Aid. I believe the nice things that he says, but I don't want to believe him. I want to look at it from the perspective of what can I take from John and put through a microscope and continuously evolve so that I can have some continuing utility with it, right? I'm not doing it because John says so, but more because what is that? What is the message? And how can I improve his message in my context? Because John's message, if you look at it, John Seddon's work is more in the UK, more biased towards public sector. That's where the Vanguard method is hugely used. But can we take that and apply to knowledge work? And I loved his recent book, Beyond Command and Control, the best yet. I strongly recommend that people read it. There are a couple of chapters on Scrum and Agile and his view of it, and I totally concur. Uh, in fact, through that lens, we are actually cheating organizations. Most of the coaching that we do is, if it's a book like his book, I want you to cheat, right? And we are cheating. The work that we do is not going to make, and that includes me. I'm at fault for that. As an agile coach, the work that I do is not going to make them agile. So that's the crux of it. So again, Cunavin has a bias. I'm looking at natural sense making. A lot of people either love Dave Snowden or they hate him. I'm on the camp that I love him. In fact, there's a lot of argument. You go to the internet that people say many of Dave's ideas are already there. It is from the past. Ashby said it X years ago, or somebody else said it Y years ago, or system thinking encompasses complexity and Cunavin and so forth. The brilliance of Snowden is to take something very complex topic like complexity and bring it down to a piece of paper, a tablecloth napkin, and bring the conversation to the level that could be used day to day for a variety of things. Now that is utility to me. So I don't give a damn about who invented what and who said what. Maybe it's Dave, maybe it is not. But the guy has done a lot of work simplifying it for the masses, for people who don't understand complexity, to get them to use it in decision making. So I give him all props for that. But again, I question his work too, and the basis that how can it be improved? How can it be made better? How can it be used like idiots by me? I'm no Dave Snowden, and how can I use it for utility in my work in a way that I can realize or help my clients realize value from it with the limitations, right? If I go do my work at my client, I'm not bringing Dave Snowden along with me. Now I could call him; he would come by if he's asked to come. But that's besides the point. We are trying to problem solve with secondhand knowledge. We lack the 20 years of learning that he has gone through, and we are constantly catching up. So again, how do we apply the best utility in that context is the question. So for me, Cunavin is a fantastic tool, and I have a lot of ideas in simplifying the use of it for the masses in a variety of ways, and you will be hearing from me very soon on some applications to software development, product development, and so forth that will dumb down the use of Cunavin in a way that the value of his visualization, the back of the napkin kind of approach to change and decision making can be actually be of extremely high utility, and I look forward to that. And there's the comment from John that they will be here tomorrow on this channel. It's early for me at 6 o'clock, and I will be there. And that's why I'm saying I'm biased. But I'm biased to the point that I don't consider it a religion. I consider it utility as long as it is useful to me in a particular context. If it does not answer my questions that I'm trying to raise on behalf of my clients, then I will go seeking for different answers, which lie elsewhere to solve the customer problem.
Thank you, Srikanth. So just curious, right? So just about Cynefin. So how do you apply it in practice? So let's say you go into a client next week, Monday morning, and
Mhm.
this is in your toolbox. How would you use it?
The toolbox. So, great question, John. Usually I don't go in with an answer. My job is not to pull out any tool at all. The first thing is,
Hmm.
in anything that I do, I first want to understand the problem they're solving, and then in the context of the problem they're solving, if this tool is valuable to that conversation, then I'll bring it up. And most likely it is, right? If you take large old school organizations that we look at, many of the practices like project management are built around the obvious domain. They believe that things are predictable. You can build a plan and you can roll it out, and the answers are well known. And the plan, which is really an illusion at the point the planning takes place, because it's just a plan is just a belief system that this is true, becomes really true. The dates become cast in stone. But the actual work, the software development work, often is in the complex domains. There's a lot of unknown unknowns. There is the people problem, the knowledge problem. So this kind of tool helps to talk about it. What is it? Is it the domain of known knowns, where we can apply best practices? Sometimes in some situation, maybe waterfall is ideal because it's a series of steps and you don't really require Kanban or Scrum or any agile framework to solve the problem. But in other situations, if you want utility, you want to test the market. And if you want to test the market, you want to go very quickly to the market. If you want to go quickly to the market, you want to probe them, right? What is the first set of features you can probe the market with to determine whether there's utility? That is your MVP. And then you can pull out Cynefin as a tool to categorize the decision making that you're using and apply the right answers in the context of the problem that you're trying to solve. And that's really how the tool is useful as a beginning to a conversation.
I have another use for it as well. So I often get asked, why do we need agility? We used to have complexity before. We solved these problems before. We can just do it the old way.
Mhm.
And so then I would use this as a lens on which domain do they think they're in, what kind of practice is appropriate, and that essentially what you said earlier, for example, maybe using waterfall on a complex problem, I describe that as a freight train to chaos and bad kind of chaos.
Mhm.
Um, so I find it useful in that sense, and also to understand how people should respond to particular problems. But thank you very much for your views on that.
In fact, this is an announcement. Actually, I've developed a board called the Cynefin board
Really?
to replace the Scrum and Kanban board. I'm planning to put it out in the market very soon.
What do you
So,
call it? The Cynefin board, as in same
yeah,
spelling? Okay.
yeah. I mean, I want to call it a Cynefin board because we're applying Cynefin into the Scrum and Kanban board at a
Yeah.
local team level to problem solve or do your day-to-day work, whether it's task or prioritization, to bring that into context. So a variety of couple of approaches to that is, one is if you are doing paper-based problem solving, you have a board on the wall, then it's different from if you're using a tool. Like how do I use a Cynefin board with Jira, for example, or using Trello. And I should be articulating these answers very soon, right? So I'm looking at practical use of Cynefin by Scrum teams or Kanban teams in their context to bring about their decision making on a day-to-day basis at a very granular level. And I should be able to expose this in probably a future session. I'll send you my articles first once they're ready to consume.
Thank you. I'm also curious about your views on theory of constraints, um, because well, there's a lot of fresh news on theory of constraints these days, and there's kind of fresh energy around that.
Yes, they are. Again, if we are practicing things like systems thinking and lean, I think
Yeah.
theory of constraints logically kind of fits into that same meta model of flow. The focus is on flow, right? So essentially, I'm a big fan of Eliyahu Goldratt. I read or listened to all 9 of his audiobooks. And the way I listen to them is I listen to them in sequence. So I listen to his books in the sequence that he wrote them across about 20 years of time. So I try to not look at their method or their approach, but how did they evolve? How did
Yeah.
they take their viewpoint and evolve it to application of their viewpoint to value? So I could say I understand Goldratt fairly well from the way he wanted to do things, and it is hugely set on the manufacturing metaphor. So it kind of ties into John Seddon's work, work backwards from the customer. You are eliminating the biggest constraint backwards to flow. Again, lean does similar thing in flow, having everybody have eyes on the ball, improving everything all at the same time to improve flow. So yeah, I'm grossly simplifying it. Of course, deep practitioners will probably nitpick what I say, but then for me, I'm a transdisciplinary practitioner, so I look at TOC in the context of all the other practices, not uniquely in the terms of just that one alone.
Understood. We've got
Yeah,
a
so
we've got a comment from Daniel Dwaron. He's one of the co-authors of the recent Tame Flow book, Tame Your Work.
yes.
And he's got a comment here. I love Daniel's sense of humor, but I don't understand this point. So Daniel, you'll have to help me with this one. There's another one actually. So Dave Snowden gives theory of constraints classes applied to Kinevin and Chicago. Oh, very good. Thank you, Daniel. I didn't know that. I'll ask Dave about that tomorrow actually, because he'll be on the show tomorrow. That's cool. I didn't, and I believe Dave has done some work with design thinking as well. So that's kind of
It is. So all these work, so by themselves, TOC is done in a particular way. So is design thinking, right? I did the Dave design thinking course a few months back
yeah.
as an observer to his course. So I've done it several times as he has presented about it. All Dave is saying is that design thinking is a fairly linear process, right? Many of these are linear processes. If you take design thinking, we broad-based problems. When we narrow down to a narrow set of problems, we broad-based solution. Then we narrow down to solutions, and we pick something, and then we prototype and validate. And then we iterate this several times. So good design thinking really requires deep ethnography practitioners who can coach. But what we see in the market is a lot of design thinking houses with very poor practices selling it as just like safe, like scaled agile. Design thinking is the fad of the season, so it is sold as the thing to do. But in the complexity space, such linear flow of design might be too slow and too little and too late. So you can broad base that with a lot of Canadian and complexity practices. Like, for example, you could do multiple parallel safe to fail experiments with design thinking, which is what you do in the complex domain. Why? Because if you if you uh, if you are really probing the system, many of your probes are going to fail. So if your probes are going to fail, it might be too costly and slow to wait. And if you're going to do that, you need multiple probes so that some probes will succeed, being the common sense answer to it. So I practice the same way, right? Again, as I told you, John, I'm not trying to put down Steve or Doiron, who are really deep practitioners of TOC, but I challenge them. Can they practice without TOC? Can they practice Cuneiform? Can they practice Scrum without using TOC? can they practice safe without using other constructs? So we are blinded or limited by our own practices. Maybe you can, maybe you cannot. And so that's the way I look at it. I'm not really wedded to anything. I'm wedded to finding answers in the multitude of practices together all at the same time.
I guess if you're operating based on principles, you might be a bit safer than following a framework, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So as long as there's some underpinning theory that kind of holds to some kind of steel thread of theory that if all is lost, if you don't follow everything that they say you should do, that, these are the things you probably absolute minimum you should do for this to work.
Yes.
Maybe, yeah.
And what would Elliot Goldratt do if he was alive today? Is the question, right? We kind of freeze these constructs and they become point in time. We have to look beyond that, right? You have to look at beyond what will it be today if they were around. What would the Ashby be today, or what would Russell Ackoff say if he were in 2020 with his systems thinking practices? He may not be saying the same thing. They would all have evolved. So
I say the same as well. I follow Manchester United Football Club for my sins. And the thing I often say is that even if Alex Ferguson came back, I'm not sure he'd do well because things have changed. It's about teams working well as units now instead of what's the star player we need to buy so we're all going to get better magically. So I think there's...
actually, that is an interesting thing that you raised as an example. Let's say you're a fan of Manchester United. You are, right?
Yeah.
What are you a fan of? The existing team, the existing players, the players from the past 10 years ago, which was a completely different set of players?
Yeah. Probably fond memories of the past, yeah.
Is it the logo? Is it... what is it? Is it the stadium that you go to, and they might have switched stadiums along the way? So what is Manchester United really?
It's the club, but for me, it's about the grounds and memories as well of Irish players for the club. So happy memories and so on, and then you kind of stick with it. But I just found it interesting. I know what you're saying, that nothing kind of stays the same. Like the river isn't the same, like the water is flowing and all that.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
So Dave Snowden says that too. Context is time and place. So for many of the things, time and place are very important. The environment and the timing. So what may not be relevant today might be relevant tomorrow, and what might not be relevant yesterday might be relevant today. So because there's always change going on. So Cynefin itself means that, right? You're a function of the environment and the time and the place. That's what he means by it. So that's an interesting way to visualize Cynefin.
I got a few points coming here from Daniel Grant through a different account on Twitter. So yeah, in the 2020, you know this anyway because you're becoming I think you're on the path to become a Cynefin trainer. But basically, in the 2020 series, one of the questions I've got for Dave tomorrow is these changes that were in the blog post in the St. David's Day blog post series. Like obvious now renamed to clear. I'm going to be asking, is that official or is it something he's trying to decide on?
Yes, he has changed obvious to clear. I don't care. Again, I'm not trying to stay true to the book, right? That's not my intent. I'm trying to stay true to what he is practicing, or what is Dave practicing over the last 20 years. Or he's put out the Cynefin framework from 99 onwards. 21 years of Cynefin is what he says. Yeah. So I'm less concerned about terminology. I give two hoots to terminology. Disorder has been changed to aphoric and confused. Now it's called AC. Those are trivialities. Let's ask the big question, John. Let's go to a Google today or a Facebook today, or a Netflix today or a Southwest today. They're not practicing systems thinking or Cynefin or Lean or TOC, or they are just themselves. They are kicking ass in the industry. Incidentally, it looks like they are practicing these things because a priori it looks the patterns. We humans are pattern imaginators, right? So in our mind it looks like, hey, this fits this model. When I read Eric Schmidt and his book on Google, I thought, hey, everything that he talks about Google, the way they do work, looks like large scale Scrum to me. But that is my pattern recognition machine trying to make patterns of it. So those are just words. They will come up with something tomorrow and change some of these words tomorrow. But that's less of the question here. Is that not about, yes, words have meaning. You go to the market, there's no common understanding, right? You go to many Scrum teams. They don't know what Scrum is as a group. They can't come to agreement on what Scrum is. But they will say, we use Scrum every day, or we use SAFe every day, and nobody knows what Scaled Agile is, right? It's funny that they don't know what they're practicing. Well, so I'm more at an abstract level, right? Uh, so I look at what is the utility. Can I realize something from it? What can I squeeze from these that is useful to me and the environments that I work in? That's the question. That's the big question. So I want to take it to a higher elevation that way, rather than, yes. If I talked about system thinking or lean, my talks will be completely full of mistakes with terminology and holes. But conceptually, I'm trying to walk in Ono's shoes. What did Ono do across the 50 years in Toyota? What did he learn, and how did he do that? That's what I want to learn from him, not the codification or lean. That's what I want from Goldratt, right? How can I walk in his shoes? How can I walk in Dave's shoes or others, right? That's the big question. Of course, I should fix these slides. I'm not good at that, so we'll be a little behind time.
But when you figure out how to walk in these people's shoes, let me know, will you? I'd love to do that as well.
Yes, and great point. What Daniel said is that, yes, I have to get to the tier if constraint. I have not seen the Chicago video. Dave Star charges money for that, so I'm yet. The things have been tight with the COVID situation, so trying to conserve. I don't want to spend $200 on watching the Theory of Constraints video, and so it's on my to-do list too. And even if I look at Dave and Holt looking at Theory of Constraints, I'm going to look at, are they wrong? Does it make sense to me? And will I use it? And if I use it, will I use it differently than what they say to use it? Because I don't believe them. They are just one viewpoint. They are blessed to look at it from their perspective, their journey, their learning, whatever their life has been. But hey, that is less valuable to me. What I learn from it and apply in my own context is what is value for me. So on my to-do list.
One thing that's striking me, I just had this image of the Karate Kid movie, the first one, and of someone and the client metaphorically being the Karate Kid learning how to do karate, and you asking questions. Is that your style? Is it to metaphorically? Would that be kind of your coaching style, or if you were in the client,
Yes,
how would you be acting, kind of thing?
Yes, I want to distill, say, business agility into a few metaphors.
Yeah.
Because we humans are storytellers. We use cognitive heuristics. So in order to do that, you want to distill down. We are not good at complex rules.
Yeah.
So we are not good at change. Again, Dave puts it right. Any cognitive work we do, we are trying to optimize the use of energy by getting away with the least possible use of energy for it. So if that is so, then yes, we need answers which are very simple that we can take to organizations. Here are 6 heuristics, or here are six metaphors, and like I have some metaphors too. If you share my screen, I have some metaphors too.
Sure.
You may not like it. It's a little rude for some people, and so here are my metaphors, right? It's your customer stupid, it's enabling your people stupid, it's the system stupid, and of course, keep it simple stupid. If you do all this, you have business agility, right? So
Yeah, I'm totally with you. On the so the employee. So I debate with people about this. So first of all, you got the project mindset you kind of have to tackle. There's nothing
mhm.
wrong with projects. It's just how you deal with them. Having long-term stable teams and stuff like that. It depends on the context, of course. And then you got focus on the product, and then of course that can even go wrong as well, because you bring a great idea to a product group, and if it doesn't fit their agenda, they just bounce it, right? Because it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't fit with their way of thinking. So I'm a big believer as well. It's about the people. I think actually a level of thinking above thinking about the customer is always thinking about your own people. Because you're basically unleashing massive creativity. And then, of course, you're right. The structure, culture follows structure, doesn't it? So we have really complicated organizations.
No, wait a minute. I don't believe that in totality. So
Okay, go ahead.
culture might follow structure, but
Yeah,
action predicates structure. So I don't recommend wholesale change in structure to have change. I rather you carve out an environment where you can experiment with or without structural change. And then you can codify the environment later into whatever structure it evolves to be. So for me, structure evolves.
yeah, I agree with that. But
Yes.
there's a bit of a conflict on what you're saying, and I
Hmm.
think there is. Maybe there isn't. Because what you said earlier was you quoted Deming, right? And you said that I'm not sure what your exact words were about that, but most of the opportunity is in the system.
It is.
Kind of like fix the system. Now, I accept, of course, there's a human aspect to that.
Hmm.
So where there's a disconnect for me, but maybe I'm just not following your logic, is when you say that, well, maybe it's just the wording in terms of the use of structure, but structural change. I mean, you can't just blow a company up. You just destroy it. It'll just be chaos. Um, you need to go on a journey to try and simplify the structure. Surely, where I'm trying to
Uh,
figure out where we
y-
disagree here.
yes and no, right? I believe that structure also, in some ways, an outcome. So in design, pathways emerge based on usage, right? Like for example, there are two ways to build a park. You can pour down all the pathways in concrete and build a park, or you can build a park without any pathways and leave the natural pathways to evolve based on how
True.
people
Yeah.
use it, and then
Yeah.
solidify the path later on, which
Yeah. I
is
agree with that.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah. So if that is so, that is true for structure too.
It
So
is true.
so
Yeah.
all I'm saying is that I have it in my last slide,
Go on. Yeah.
so uh, I had it somewhere. Is What you do is you protect the environment. Okay,
Right.
you
What I
create the so if you understand human behavior, if you look at point number 4, if
Yeah.
you can bring collaboration, cooperation, and breathing room into a group, then the structure will evolve to it. So
Yeah. I
you
agree.
might
I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. You can't
so
just
yeah,
get a magic
yeah,
wand. Yeah.
it's I hate to prescribe an answer.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
So in the context of the situation, structure might or might not be the right thing to go after, right? So I'm not. Craig may say in his Lahmann's law that structure is the underlying driver. Then the structure is alone not the underlying. Say tomorrow a leader changes, and whatever structure we set up, the new person is antithesis to that structure. He can take it apart. So, so for me, the system still has to survive any changes
You agree.
in the structure. So then when you're doing values and principles based change, then if you have inculcated enough values in the system, then the values and principles will still survive irrespective of the structure.
Yeah, you can't just blow up the structure. Absolutely, mindset needs to change. And the last thing you want to do is simplify things, and then you still left an environment where the wrong person can get hired and basically
Yes.
upset everything you've done for 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do have it in my, the slide that I have it in is in my coaching approach. I'll just flip to that.
Okay.
So if you really look at it, as a coach, I believe that I need to facilitate the client solving the problem, identifying the problems,
Yeah.
walk them through the Gemba if possible, because they
Yeah.
might or might not do that. Then
Yeah.
teach them what this change is about. So they have to be exposed to these tools, system thinking or lean thinking or Kinevin or what these tools are. Then they can, in the context of that, they know their constraints. Is my structure my constraint? Can I change my structure, or can I not change my structure and still try to somehow pull together a set of teams to experiment? That's the question. So I'm not predicating on based on any change. So when I teach them and they say this change is too much and I just want to roll out safe, I might say, thank you, go ahead, find someone and roll out safe and walk out from there.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's not predicated on answers. It's predicated on helping them learn. So if you are in the domain of experiments that will help them learn and adapt, then structure is also one of them. So I'm really not in the dogma territory like Craig would say, Lahman would say, yes, structure is the first order. So what? If you're as intelligent as Craig Lahman, then you find an answer to that too. That would be my argument to him. How would you sell change to people who do not want the structural change? Then that makes you a genius.
Yeah. I love what Daniel Dwaron is saying here as well. Culture is a reflection of the company system. And I also love a quotation as well. I'm just paraphrasing here. Edgar Schein, and he said that culture is the shared set of assumptions, written and unwritten. I find that interesting, and I think there's something similar in the goal.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I'm a big fan of Schein, Edgar Schein's work. I recently read his fifth edition of his final edition of his book again. So I do models from him. I don't believe him in totality. I make my own adjustments to what I see in that space in concert with. So nobody is by the book. It's Edgar Schein's perspective. So valuable to the extent that I can use him, and valuable, not valuable for some of the other things. So yes, in fact, I empathize more with the culture being the unsaid part. Most of the said part is really unrealistic. In fact, most of the values, like take even simple things like Scrum values. We have the 5 Scrum values, which Scrum, as a Scrum trainer, you would be probably teaching too, John, right? Yeah. But you can't teach value to a system which doesn't want to practice it. So which means I'm only forcing the values on the system, even on the team. Thou shalt have courage or transparency. What does it mean? If you're in a caustic system, I can't push transparency into that system because I said so, because Scrum said so, or empirical process control said so.
Yeah, I think I must be one of the worst Scrum trainers in the world, because people get very disappointed. I'm not trying to sell or convince people. It is what it is. You believe it or you don't, or you like it or you don't, and it's useful or you don't. And if you don't find it useful, then use something else, right? So
yes, it's a tool, and every tool has got its limitations, right? If you can work within the limitations of the tool, but you can't fix the tool until you're really broad-based enough to be agnostic enough to fix it. If you fix it with your limited knowledge, you're going to only use your past practices, and probably all you might know is waterfall. So you'll bring all those practices into this tool.
When you say fix it, what's it? What do you mean by that?
So I'm looking at Shuhari, right? If you're a re-level of Scrum, then you don't need Scrum anymore. You would have evolved your own way of work. If you're at the shoe level of Scrum, and you're already fixing Scrum, saying, hey, this part of Scrum doesn't work for me, so I'm going to improve it, then most likely you're bringing practices from your knowledge in past which are not useful to fix Scrum, because you're doing it without the knowledge and the thinking tools and practices that are required to actually evolve to the restate. So most of those fixes will be quite foolish.
I find your fixing phrase curious, but I won't get into a battle with you about that because I'm not sure what we're fixing there. It's just probably adapting, maybe implementing comprehensive practice. I don't know, but
When you're fixing Scrum, I mean the practices like zombie Scrum or Scrum Butt or things like that.
okay, yeah, I would just call that. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I understand where you're going. Going back to basics sometimes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And you mentioned ethnography earlier, but we had a conversation the other day as well. I have to confess, I didn't totally understand. So I'm going to ask a question. It's about, you mentioned two types of ethnography. You
Yes.
mentioned process ethnography, and you mentioned customer ethnography. Now, customer ethnography, I think, is like related to Lean UX, understanding what's going on with the customer, all that kind of stuff. Well, at least I think it is. But can you explain to me what you mean by those two expressions?
Sure. Some of them are my own terms, so I'm making up as they go, right?
Okay.
So I'll just move to the last slide, which has got a slide on anthropology and large-scale problem. So for me, much of humans, when we codify things, information is lost. That is something that is table stakes. So if I collect narratives, like I'm sense making, if I collect narratives from my people, just the process of collecting it. So the saying is, people say things that they want, but they really don't know what they want, but they do different things with the tools and services. You're using anthropology to observe, right? Eventually it's mass scale observing. That's what it is about. So how can you observe customer behavior to fix the true problems that they're not able to articulate that they have, in a way that solves things that they're not able to say they want solved, so that you give them the right experience that solves the problem for them. So if you take lean on the production line, Taichi Ono says that you want to remove waste that does not add value to the customer. So he's deploying all the manufacturing people at scale to observe the production line process to improve the quality of the product and the quality of the process. So that's what I call as process ethnography. They don't really understand the customer. They are not in touch with the customer, but they are blind to the customer, but trying to improve things on the hope that survival of the system will deliver something better to the customer. But in knowledge work, it's not just improving the processes. It's not just improving the methods and practices that the teams are practicing, right? Your skills around the tools and technologies, or your learning of continuous integration, or TDD or BDD, or your DevOps practices. That's another aspect of it beyond the process ethnography that they are doing. They're observing and fixing the process through continuous improvement. The better they can problem solve. I try to not take Lean UX. For me, Lean UX is every team member. That's all it is. So if you can make every team member in an organization be customer centric and learn what the customer needs are, then they would problem solve in a better way to build better things than anybody can. So that's what I call as customer ethnography across the system. So, and then you can do it through a variety of ways. You can do it through Cunavan, a SenseMaker. Of course, SenseMaker is not something that Dave found. It is based on a lot of other practices, and he's something that he applies. Part of what Dave evolved is his thinking around instead of diets, ability to pick triads in order to reduce bias. That is one of Dave's findings, which he uses in his sense-making technique. That is one way of looking at it. You can always ask the customer what the customer wants. You can also ask your employees what you are doing and what things need to be from your perspective, and that would include your operations and your technologies and your product ecosystem. And you can also collect big data. And I think recently Dave had an article around big data, rich data, and thick data. If you Google it, it'll come up. So it's a combination of these perspectives. But I believe that there's much more than that. There's also small data. Small data, and I'm adding this word, what Dave would call potentially as needle in the haystack, or what he would call as I'm missing the word. In complexity, it's the small things that matter, right? That you can react on. And that essentially, if you can go after those with a vengeance, then you do really well.
Thank you. So if I was to summarize, I hope I got this right, when you say process ethnography, you mean people observing the process and seeing how they can improve the process, but sometimes they lose sight of the customer when they're doing that.
That is correct.
And when you say customer ethnography, it's kind of like, well, observing what the customer is doing, but also understanding that the customer also doesn't know what they want a lot of the time. There's a few different bodies of knowledge around that.
So the extension to that would be that the doers designing and doing the work will have to do that observing themselves. So anything that's a stage of translation in the discovery process, in the ideation process, is lost in translation. In fact, one of the things that I am going to write about is that do not write user stories or features. So if you're transcribing, if there are customer problems, you want to give the customer problems as written by the customer to the teams, not interpret that through analysis or rewrite it in any way into a story and then give it to the teams. That itself, the essence of the problem is lost.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That sounds really good. Anything else you wanted to cover? We're probably going to wrap up in a few minutes, Srikanth. We just got
this is actually a high-level abstract thinking process, John. The idea was that I'm not really coming with answers, but these are the things that I do at work every day. In the context of the problem solving, I pull a rabbit out of the hat in that situation. It just naturally comes to me, what should I do now? And then I help the client with it. Because when you question and you're exposed to a multitude of tools and techniques, then you keep asking, what is the right tools and techniques in this context? What is the right thinking in this context? I mean, what can we use? There will be always constraints. In this constrained situation that we are in, what can we use? So,
one of the things that I learned as well, Srikanth, is learning the work as well. So whatever industry I'm in, I say I'm a XYZ industry dummy, which I am, and I genuinely try to learn about the work and what they're trying to do before even pulling any rabbit out of a hat, because it's so we can come across as being theoretical sometimes, can't we? But I'm sure you do that as well. It's just trying to making sure we understand what problems they're trying to solve.
Yes, of course, you have to bound yourself to the situation most of the time. It's not a free for all, and you need to do your work as well. But given the right engagement, if you are at the right space, you could build brand new organizations fairly quickly. I've been seeing over the last 15 years, long drawn out, very scratching the surface kind of change. And people would argue, John said it right? Yes, there's a lot of focus on continuously improving. So yes, there is value to continuously improving little bit at a time. But the bigger value is, are we building the right things, and can we address that first? That's what we are trying to do, right? And if we do that well, then maybe the value of the process work will be more valuable. But we tend to focus more on the process, and you see vendors coming in and say, oh, roll out Jenkins and it'll save X minutes, but then they roll out Jenkins and they do exactly the same thing with Jenkins that they were doing before with the previous tool. So a lost opportunity again, right? So things like that.
Indeed. That's an interesting comment here from Daniel. Continuous improvements seldom lead to major cash. So I think the here is that, it's basically unless you focus on the constraint. So trying to find a big lever, basically, where is the opportunity? Regardless of the thinking principles that you're using, we are looking for the big levers, aren't we? That will kind of get us in the right direction. Thank you, Daniel, for your comments this evening.
And thanks, Daniel, for being here. Actually, I'm happy that you are. I'm yet to read your book. I've been telling Steve, I have some reading difficulties. If it's a book or a Kindle book, I can't read. I have deficits in my frontal lobe that doesn't allow me to focus on reading, but I do audiobooks a lot. But you guys don't have a book. I did buy both of your. I bought your book, Tame Flow, very recently, but it's still sitting there. So
hopefully we can get that sorted out. Because anyway, Daniel, these days any book that I read is on Audible because I've got backlog already of physical ones, and I tend to chew through the audio ones because I go walking and stuff. And Daniel's been very kind. Love you too, Daniel. Love the work you do. So thank you also to Andrew as well, who gave us a lovely welcome earlier. Thank you for joining from, not sure is it Ukraine or Germany where Andrew is at the moment. Really appreciate you joining, and everybody who's been viewing. It tends to be 10 to 15 viewing afterwards than live, so hi to the people who are watching the recording as well, and thank you for watching. Tomorrow we will have Dave Snowden at 11 a.m. UK time, and it's going to be an interview, so there's an outline, and I will try to start with where did Kinevin even come from, and what the 2020 updates as well, even the 2019 updates. Srikanth, I want to thank you very much for coming on. We've been here for nearly 2 hours. Who would have thought we'd be talking for almost the full 2 hours? And thank you so much for coming on. It's you've proved how big your brain is, and I think you really are like one of those coaches in the Karate Kid movie. Whichever clients you got are going to be really lucky clients. I love the way you think, and thank you for inspiring us on this show this evening.
Thanks, John. It's really you, right? You asked me to come, and I really, really thank you for that. It helps me articulate who I am today. And yes, I'll be back. I hope to be in several of your meetings to follow the participants that you bring, and that's part of my learning process. I love anything that challenges my brain. I'm not wedded to my ideas. There are many situations where I advise my client, and the next day I go back, I say I was wrong the previous day and advise them something else the next day, so which will be a better utility in their situation. So I put myself through a microscope, and I enjoy doing that. So
you're faster learning than me. It takes me 3 years to realize I'm wrong. Yeah, but that's okay. Getting better and better, but unfortunately getting older as well, right? I've only got 13 years left to retirement age. So will I ever get it right? I don't know, Srikanth. I probably won't. That's okay.
No, I don't think I'll retire either. Retire. If you retire your noodles, you're nobody. So
yeah,
if you look at people like Deming or others, they were working till their last day. I hope I'm blessed enough to do that. If things allow me to be working in some form, keep those noodles working, then I'll be alive. If the noodles are not working, I'm already dead. So
virtual high five. Good stuff. Cheers.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining. That's it for today. See you tomorrow with Dave Snowden. Thank you very much, everyone.
I appreciate it, John.